Have you ever heard of the name Ernest Shackleton? The boat captain's name was Ernest Shackleton. And if you don't know that story, I'm not going to go into it in great detail here today. But if you don't know that story, my goodness, it is one of the greatest stories of survival and of persistence ever. The name of the ship was Endurance. And man, what a great story. It can be used in so many parables and comparisons and illustrations and everything like that. The Endurance and its entire crew got stranded out, I think, up in the Arctic. And the crew and Ernest Shackleton survived just unbelievable odds in this survival situation where they were running out of food. At one point, they had dogs. They had sled dogs that they had to eat. They had to use parts of the ship for fires and that sort of thing until the ship, basically the ocean, more or less reclaimed the ship. They had to travel across the frozen ocean by foot, carrying supplies and whatever they could, seeking out, going out for land. Eventually, what happened, if I'm remembering right, is they found an island. That's what it was. They were packing along their supplies, dragging them behind them like a sled in their emergency boats. So eventually they come to an island. The ice melted enough that they could get into these emergency boats and head back out to sea, but they left most of the crew there on that island and said, we'll come back for you. I think it took them like a whole year for the ones who set out on the boat to reach civilization and then to come back and rescue the rest of the crew. Unbelievable story, but when I was reading recently, and I've known about Ernest Shackleton and that whole thing there for a long time, but one thing that I was reading about that recently, the author wrote about that whole experience. There's a state that people get into when things look so grim, life just doesn't seem that important. And I remember in the heart of my own pain and recovery and my authentic recovery from borderline personality disorder, reaching that state. It wasn't a suicidal state. I wasn't going to do anything to hurt myself. But I do remember thinking, well, if I did die, it wouldn't be too bad. It wouldn't be too bad at all. There's a state that people get into when things look so grim, life just doesn't seem that important. If you're currently experiencing that, I'd like it to bring it to your attention that just because things seem a certain way doesn't mean that they are a certain way. So just because life doesn't seem that important doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that you're experiencing a really gloomy time right now. So remind yourself of that. And just like Ernest Shackleton's ship, you remember what it was called? Endurance. That's what you need. That's what you need. Endurance. And endurance is a beautiful quality. Endurance is what will get you through tremendous gloom. I think I said not too long ago that what I've always admired, rather than these guys who can, bench press 19 tons of weights, the thing about these Olympic weightlifters is that they get that thing up over their head and, in 2 seconds their arms start shaking and they got to drop it. So it's a great accomplishment that they were able to lift that thing at all. But that doesn't impress me. What impresses me much more is that a person who can lift half that weight and hold it up there for 20 minutes. That's impressive. That's endurance. Runners running races, long distance races, they pace themselves. It is endurance that gets them across the 20-mile mark or whatever it is, So that's really, it's such a beautiful quality, and I wanted to remind you of that. Just because things seem gloomy and grim and life doesn't seem so important, remind yourself that with endurance, you will again see just how important life is. If you get a hankering to look him up, his name is spelled Ernest Shackleton, Shackleton. It's an amazing story. You will really enjoy that. In fact, if you're one of those people who feel like life is so grim and you want to pump up your endurance, I highly recommend looking up Ernest Shackleton and the endurance and reading all about that story. It might animate you and encourage you in really wonderful ways.